Kojo, 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 Kojo.
Thank you, Arth, for giving me this opportunity to be sitting and discussing Dharmic nation with the greatest minds of India today. My first question, Dr. R Jagannathan.
Not doctor.
Okay. Okay. Since there are too many doctors on the stage, I assumed you are one too. My first question is, what is Dharmic nation? Is Dharmic nation different from the nation as envisioned by the Constitution of India? For the last 75 years, we thought that there's only one nation as envisioned in the preamble of the Indian Constitution. So please explain to us, why is the necessity to have India as a Dharmic nation, and what does it really mean?
Thank you, Aarti. So, basic point, I'd like to start from where I was and where I am today. I'm usually an economics writer, and I've been doing that for a long time. For the last couple of years, I've been looking at something different. I said, what makes us different from just being an economic and materialistic people, right? But that's not what our history was. We had both. We had all kinds of things. Our four Purusharthas talk about dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. So everything is valid in the concept of what we think are individual objectives to subserve, right? So to come first to why I started writing this book and shifted from economics to the social, cultural, and national sphere, the reason is simple. I mean, there has been a lot of loose talk latently. Many people talking about Hindu Rashtra without defining what it is, what do they mean. It allowed some of the enemies of this nation to say, okay, if you ever have a Hindu Rashtra, you're going to become a Hindu version of Pakistan, a theocratic state that torments all its people, including its own. We've seen that in Pakistan. Even though it's been defined as an Islamic state, Muslims are the biggest victims there because I think they made it a theocracy, right? And forget the minorities. The minorities anyway didn't have a place there, but they are now targeting their own people, right? So ultimately a theocratic state will destroy itself. So where I came from were on basically 2-3 points. First, in order to define what we mean by our nationhood, I mean, in 90s, I think Samuel Huntington defined who are we for Americans and the Western civilization. I think somewhere we need to tell ourselves, who are we? What defines us as a civilizational people, as a civilizational state, and what are we, right? So before we come to the idea of Hindu Rashtra, I think the idea is to decide what are the four key things, four key pillars of what I think define our attitudes. That is the four religions that we call Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism. These were birthed in this place. 4 pillars. And there are a lot of myriad smaller traditions and all that all were came together, sometimes fought with each other, but ultimately they came to a synthesis, a consensus, that we can have all kinds of differences, but we agree to live together and despite our differences. So that is what is defined by what I mean by a dharmic state, in a sense that it sets a playing field for both managing differences and living in unity at the same time. So which is why I say we are a dharmic state, because the idea of dharma, however you define, whether it is in religious terms or in non-religious terms, whether you accept the spirit of the Vedas or you are against it, it works very well. So that is first part. The second thing I thought was, though the idea of Rashtra, Hindu Rashtra, Rashtra is different from state. But one of the things I do want to emphasize is that Rashtra cannot also be separated from state, because it is the state that ultimately protects the rule of law. And if the Rashtra has a certain set of, it defines the playing field for all faiths and all differences, that Rashtra needs to be protected by something that the state defines as the playing field, the limits to which anybody can go, right? So, and we are also in a unique position, in fact, a unique negative position, where there are 100 nations that define themselves as Christian or Christian majority. There are 50 plus calling themselves Muslim majority. So what really happens is we have 2 large minorities here. So it's easy for the world to see what you're doing wrong. But you, as a nation, cannot defend even the Hindus in your neighborhood. You cannot defend them in Afghanistan, you cannot defend them in Pakistan, you cannot defend them in Bangladesh, despite all the demographic threats to all of them, and you can't defend them inside yourself. You know, you come from Kashmir, we know how we have not been able to defend even that. So if India and the anti-CAA protects, actually the penny dropped for me there. I said, look, if you as a Dharmic nation cannot even define some of your core civilizational rights and the rights of some of the people who call themselves Hindus, then what are you? You are not just an economic being trying to be a global superpower in the next 10 years. You are actually destroying yourself. And in the process, it doesn't matter whether you are a Hindu or not, because anybody can become a global superpower tomorrow by just doing the right economic policies. But if you don't define your core, and that's one thing, and if this state is not able to define the basic collective rights of the great religions that were birthed here, then you're going to fail, because you need two legs to stand on. One is the economic one, which I think has to be our focus over the next 10 years, but you also define yourself as a civilization so that there is some spiritual solidity behind all this economic core. So that's the reason I have tried to connect all the threads in this book. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me get Dr. Ram Madhav. Would you agree that over 800 million Hindus are at a back foot and do not get the same rights or do not have the same advantages that they should deserve or they should have in this nation of India, which we formed, let's say the Republic of India formed in 1950?
Thank you, Aarti. Let me at the outset congratulate Jagannathan for this wonderful new book that he has brought out. Dharmic nation he talked about is very unique to India at one level, but I must also add that today the discourse globally about the identity of nation is no longer about a geography and a polity. The new discourse, right from the godfathers of liberalism like Francis Fukuyama down the line, the new discourse that they are engaged in today is that nations also require certain values, certain culture in order for them to survive as one unit, in order for them to flourish. So this whole idea that nation is not just a political entity, not just a geographical entity, actually this idea is only 7 decades old. It's the post-Second World War idea. When the West got so much, naturally so much disturbed by people like Mussolini and Hitler misusing the word nationalism, they started saying that this whole idea of nationalism is wrong. Let us build civic states, civic nations, run just on constitution. That idea, which had only 7 decades of existence, has today proved to be futile. Jagannathan referred to Samuel Huntington. Samuel Huntington was the first Western scholar to challenge that idea. When he wrote that first book, of course, was Clash of Civilizations, which is a bit controversial. I also do not fully agree with him. But his second book in 2003 was a book called Who Are We? I mean, that question that Jagannathan was also asking. Who Are We was a book authored by Huntington about Americans. He said, who are we? Are we just what is described as a melting pot? A sambar, like every sabji is put in it.
A thali.
A thali. Or we are something more than that. There he also talks about we as Americans should have a value system. We have an identity, which he called as, Protestant values minus church. It's a big debate, I don't get into it. But he said that you have to build a value system based on which you create an American national identity. That, of course, that time he was demonized, vilified. But today, Fukuyama is accepting. He's saying, oh yeah, cultures also form backbone of nations. So, cultural nationalism, dharmic nationalism is now gradually becoming an in thing in the world. So, first thing for Hindus is, we have been saying this for many, many centuries now, that we are a nation of antiquity. We are not a nation born in 1947. State, of course, is run by constitution. That way we are a constitutional state. We have full respect for Indian constitution. But that constitution, that state and the entire nation is driven by a very ancient idea. That idea is what Jagannathan called as Dharmic. Somebody may call it Hindu, somebody call it Sanatana. But that idea is what which keeps this country together. That belief Hindu should not give up. Today, the liberal onslaught sometimes makes us feel a little defensive about that whole idea. But this is the time for Hindus to stand up and say, you are proud to be a nation of antiquity here. This cultural, civilizational, historical, dharmic nationhood of India is a role model for the world. How did we survive for so many thousands of years? Mohammed Iqbal wrote, यूनान मिस्र रोमा सब मिट गए जहाँ पे कुछ बात है कि हस्ती मिटती नहीं हमारी. There is something in this. Yunan gone, Egypt gone, ancient Rome doesn't exist today. But we survived. Survived because our epicenter of our national life was never constitution or state. It's a great dharma, great value system. So in that, your point that are we at the defensive, I say no. We are today awakened. So first of all, probably we should give up that victimhood syndrome, that no, we are at the receiving end. We were. But today we are at the cusp of a big transformation. With confidence, we should take this idea forward.
No, so my question to Dr. Sanyal also.
Sanjeev, please, Sanjeev.
Okay, Sanjeev. Sanjeev, is this idea of India as envisioned by Dharma, as envisioned by our Indic philosophical system, is it different from the idea of India as embedded in the Indian constitution?
Not at all. So in fact, the word secularism was only added in 1976 by an illegitimate parliament. So if you go back and look at the original discussions, there is a shared understanding throughout in the conversation that that the modern republic that will happen is a manifestation of an ancient civilization. So Nehru in his famous 15th of August 1947 speech says, the soul of a nation long suppressed finds utterance. He didn't say soul of a union of states long suppressed finds utterance. Did he say that? No. So this is an important thing to remember. Now, the constitution itself begins by saying India, that is Bharat. Now, if India and Bharat, the whole point was just a linguistic one, then we would have got on with having an English translation which was started with India, and the Hindi version would have Bharat. That would be the end of matter. But both of the words are used in both versions, India, that is Bharat. So why are both used? Because there is a clear understanding that the Republic of India is only the modern manifestation of an ancient, pre-existing civilization. And I have given many talks on this. This idea is a very, very old one. The name Bharata is mentioned in the Rig Veda as a tribe. You can clearly see in there that the name, the space, the geographical space, the cultural space in which this name is spread slowly expands. And by the time the Purana is written, by the way, the Vishnu Purana is very often quoted, but every single Puran, when you open it, in the beginning, it describes, it says, it talks about we, the people who live between the Himalayas and the oceans in the south, are called the Bharatis, or we are the sons of Bharata, something to that effect. Different Puranas have slightly different way of expressing it, but basically the idea that these are a people who live between the northern mountains and the southern seas is repeated in the beginning of every single Purana. So it's very, very clear what is going on here. Now, in addition to that, when you see in the constitution that the words, by the way, both the word secularism and the word socialism had to be introduced much later, because in the beginning, when these words were actually suggested, it's not like we turned up in 1976 and said, these are nice words, let's put them in. They were actually actively rejected by the drafting committee. And you have clearly, again, Ambedkar on both socialism and secularism actively rejects them. So in fact, there is a speech he gives to the Constituent Assembly, which he clearly states that the soul of this country comes from the same imperium, i.e. source. And therefore, the dividing up of states is not about, it's not a union of states in the sense that the US is a union of states. It draws its soul from the same imperium. And he says that I know that in many decades from now or in future time, somebody will question the fact that India is not one unified whole and is just amalgamation of random groups. And he says that I want to make this absolutely clear right in the beginning that this is not the case.
So even if we leave the words secularism and socialism aside, you in your book have actually criticized several articles which you think are problematic and in a way deny India this dharmic identity, this Indic identity. Why do you think these articles are problem for that? And second, where do you see the place of minorities in this dharmic nation? What is the vision for minorities in Hindu Rashtra, or you can say, you can call it whatever, but where do you see minorities in this space?
So come to 2 points. First, just have a slight difference in the way we said what's right or wrong with the Constitution. Our Constitution had the right ideas written in the wrong language. The problem is when you use English to write your Constitution and then try to translate it in Indian languages, what happens is religion suddenly becomes dharma, which is ridiculous. And denomination becomes sampradaya. Whereas if you do the reverse, it will not be the same. So what really happens is we inherited a certain colonial structure. A large of great ideas were gotten from the French, British, Irish, American and German constitutions, but somewhere the soul that should have been dharmic is probably missing. So words like dharma and all should have been there in the preamble and not there as a translation. So that's one part. Second thing is we inherited a colonial structure where we had an ICS that became an IAS and a judiciary that followed that kind of law. Okay, so the judiciary takes its views from what is discussed in British law or American law, not from our own jurisprudence, which preceded our birth as a nation. So the problem is when you put something like an Article 25(2), okay, which says that the state will intervene whenever they think there is a problem with, restricting entry of some people into this thing. The problem is not that you should ban anybody from entering a temple, but that when you put it into the Constitution, it gives every government the right to interfere with Hindu religious tradition no matter what. Okay, so when Article 17 already bans untouchability, to put an additional thing, it basically gives you a lateral entry point into controlling Hindu dharmic institutions. That is one problem, I think. I think it should not have been there. And to Article 25(1) talks about secular activities, you want to separate them from this thing. Can that ever be done? It cannot be done. Well, coming to the position of minorities, the whole point of dharmic nation is that we were able to live with all kinds of contradictions. After all, Buddha did not accept the authority of the Vedas. The Charvakas didn't. But none of those people were ever rejected. So when you're talking about minorities, the idea of minority itself is a wrong idea in India for the simple reason that we are a nation of minorities as defined like this. The reason is Hindus exist. Hindutva exists. Hinduness exists. Hinduism is something like we sort of lump together a whole lot of people who are Nota people. None of the above. If you're not a Muslim, Christian, Sikh, Jain or Buddha, then you become Hindu. I mean, it's like something like none of the above. So we are actually defined by a group of traditions, practices, and of course philosophical thought that substantially unifies us, but each one of us is actually a part of a confederation of ideas rather than one single thing. We were not created by one founder with one set of fundamentals. So in that sense, Hinduism is not that you come to 80% straight away and say, oh, you're such a brutal majority, you have to worry about minorities. Actually, it's not the case. We are a conglomerate, loose confederation of whole of ideas, which actually the whole majority-minority is a stupid conflation in Indian context. We should think beyond this and say everybody has to live within the thing that you accept differences and live within the confines of dharma, which is you can appreciate your own God, you can believe in monotheism, no problem, but no monopoly, no binary. That if you don't believe in my way, you're in the highway. My God or your devil. You know, this is the way the binary of is what we should abandon thinking. And there will be no problem with minorities if they accept the dharmic way of deciding differences rather than thinking that it's all a binary. So that's where I think minorities should stop thinking of themselves as minorities. We are all minorities. I mean, within every sampradaya can be considered a minority religion in its own right, right? So if we are all going to play victim cards by calling ourselves minorities, at one point in the 80s, the Ramakrishna mission said we are not Hindus, right? And sometime back, Lingayat said we are not Hindus, right? I mean, everybody has a right to deny that he is a Hindu. So in that case, my point is, let's not have this majority-minority binary. We are a nation defined by certain dharmic principles which is not equal to religion. So in that sense, Savarkar got it right. He said that, look, Hindutva is the larger reality. The religious part of it is a subset, you know. So I'm not trying to defend Savarkar or whatever he did or did not say. My point is, we should stop the binary of majority and minority. Acceptance of difference is the central feature of dharma. And if you see the Rigveda, the very last thing says, we are all here gathered together, we want to respect all gods. Huh? So if you get into a binary, you're going to be a problem. So no minority, majority, we are all equal, but they will be protected as long as you protect dharma, because dharma protects those who protect dharma.
Dr. Madhav, would you agree that there is no such thing as minority in India? Everybody is a minority. And also, would you agree that since Abrahamic faiths, since we have made a very clear distinction here that dharmic religions, dharmic philosophies are different from, let's say, the Abrahamic traditions and value system, do you see that people who practice Abrahamic faith in India, do you see them reconciling with this idea of dharmic nation? Do you see that they can be both practitioners of Islam, Christianity, as well as be dharmic or Hindu?
Oh, why not? In fact, taking the second point first, it's only and only in India that you have that liberty to practice whatever religion you want, in whichever form, whichever way you want to practice, you can practice. That is the beauty of this country. In fact, that question as to whether they can still be a Muslim or a Christian here under this system, under this whole what we call as dharmic system, is actually a foregone thing. It is only and only in this dharmic system that that kind of a freedom is available, nowhere else. In no other country of Abrahamic faiths, this kind of freedom is available. And especially take the case of the so-called Islamic countries in the world. Forget about non-Islamic faiths. Within Islamic faiths also, dominant sects not allowed to follow, practice their sect-related activity. In fact, in that sense, for a Muslim, I'm just speaking from the Muslim point of view, real Darul Aman or Darul Islam should be India. Because it is this country which has allowed for practice of all the 70 plus different sects of Islam in India. There is no one single Islamic country in the world which has different sects living together. So where is that question in the first place, that whether a minority can live in a dharmic system? Yes. And remember, it's not because of our constitution alone, although constitution does guarantee certain special rights to minorities. It's a different debate altogether, what Jagannathan has raised. Why? Because very interestingly, Constitution talks about linguistic and religious minorities. There is a minority commission also in our country, formed much later. There was a question to minority commission. Can you define who are minorities? You know, after very long deliberation, they declared that we do not have any definition. You have a commission. You have its duties, its rights, but there is no definition for minorities in India because the very concept of minority is very alien. It's a big anomaly in our country. Who is a minority here? Are you going by numbers? If you go by numbers, how can 20 crore people be a minority? If you go by numbers. If you go by religious faith, as Jagannathan ji said, in this country every day a new religious faith takes birth. So this whole concept of minority is totally a big misnomer in our system. It doesn't fit into our system. But India always has a place for all the different faiths, practices, to the extent that you can be an atheist, you can reject religion, yet you will be part of the Dharmic system. He mentioned about Charvaka. Charvaka was not even like Buddha. Buddha opposed the concept of God, divinity. But Charvaka rejected entire tradition. He said, Yavajive, Sukhanjive, Tronam Krutva, Bhipam, Grutam Pibet. Live as long as you want to live happily. Borrow ghee and enjoy life. Because once you die, who is going to ask you? It was a pure materialist life. But we never rejected him. Instead, we called Charvaka a rishi, a saint. So in this country, everybody has a place to happily live. That the minorities of this country should understand. Their safety or their life and religion safety is not only because it is enshrined in Constitution, but because it is the character of this land. You can happily live here, provided you agree that you are a part of this great system, great nation, ancient nation. For one simple reason, I say this and close. The reason being, unlike minority populations in other countries, in Europe especially, minorities in India have not come from outside. They all are part and parcel of this very country. In fact, there is a very famous post-partition statement by Khan Abdul Wali Khan, who was the supreme leader of what is Khyber Pakhtunkhwa today. Those days it used to be called NWFP. He tells, when Pakistan was to be created, was created, he tells that, what are you saying? I am a Pashtun for many centuries. I'm a Pashtun. I'm a many centuries. And I'm a Pakistani only for 40 years.
Yes.
I'm not that. So in this country, that identity that we all belong to this country for thousands of years should be accepted by the minorities of this country for the simple reason that except for less than 1%, Sayyids and Sheikhs, no Muslim in India has come from outside, from Arabia or some other country, or Turkey or any Central Asian country. They all are born here, their grandfathers are here, their great-grandfathers are here. How can mere change of religion disconnect them from their history and from their ancestry?
Well, if you asked somebody who really believes in Muslim chauvinism, he would say that I'm a Muslim first and every other identity comes later. So Sanjeev, do you see a clash between this Dharmic identity and, say, for Muslim identity?
See, those who want to make an issue of it and have a monochromatic view of their identity, then that's how it is. But let's go to another country. Sometimes it's very difficult to make these comparisons in your own country because you're too close to it. So let's take Indonesia into account. Okay? Indonesia has clearly embraced its Hindu roots. It still has a small but significant Hindu population. But if you go to Indonesia, you'll see there is Hindu cultural motifs everywhere. It's there on their currency. Their national symbol is the Garuda, which is their national airline is called the Garuda, Vishnu's Garuda. And you will see Hindu symbols literally everywhere. So if you ask the average Indonesian, you are a Muslim, but how come you have all these Hindu motifs everywhere? They will very simply tell you that we changed our mode of worship, we did not change our ancestors. So it is not something that is unique problem to India, but place like Indonesia has happily been able to carry on with the taking along their history along with their relatively recently acquired Islamic identity. This is also true for many communities in India, by the way, who may have converted but have, like Muslim Rajputs, continue doing many Hindu rituals even to this day. And they proudly remember that they had been Hindus in the past. So there are many such stories, and I think the problem is having these hardwired monochromatic identities which lead to all this conflict. Because in the end, if you go for purity, there's no end to purity. Why just Muslim, then which sect of Muslim Islam? And within the sect, there is further purity required. So there is no end to this. So this is, by the way, interestingly, an issue that was discussed in India going back 5,000, 6,000 years back in the Rig Veda. So in the Rig Veda, it's quite interesting. How did the why is the Rig Veda held so much in esteem? To understand this, you've got to understand that the Rig Veda is really the amalgam of all the chants, incantations, and hymns to all the gods to whom the original Haryanavi Bharata tribe had contact with. There were some of them were their subject tribes, which they had defeated in the Battle of 10 Kings. Others were surrounding tribes. And what they did, and what the Vedas is a amalgam of all their traditions, their gods, their thoughts of their rishis, and so on. And at the very last hymn of the Rig Veda, the chant is, come together, sit together, let all the ancient gods have a place around the sacrificial fire. So the point being made here is this, that all the gods have a place around the sacrificial fire. You can bring your own god in, and you consequently then accept everybody else's gods there. That is why many of us call ourselves Bharatiya by the name of this Haryanavi tribe. I am from Bengal. Right? Why do I consider my identity related to this ancient Haryanavi tribe? Because at some point in time, a long, long time ago, my ancestors signed up to this idea. They may have contributed their own gods. I don't know what they were. Presumably, since I'm a Shakta, it may have been Durga or Kali or whatever. And they were given a place around the sacrificial fire. And in return, I then accepted the gods, Vishnu and Indra and others of the others. And so, therefore, in that way, we added ourselves to the Bharatiya identity. And breaking away from this Bharatiya identity, by the way, and not accepting the other gods is a serious matter in the Vedic tradition. So there are many legends which tell you this. So there is the legend, for example, of Sati. What is the problem with Daksha's yajna? One of the gods has not been given his place around the fire. Therefore, Sati declares that particular yajna as being not valid, invalid. And she therefore desecrates it by entering the fire herself. And this leads to a situation where Shiva is grief-stricken, he's going to destroy the world. So what does Vishnu do? He cuts up her body into pieces and scatters her. And if you see the scattering, it's not random. It is across a certain defined geography. So literally in her own body, she unifies back this entire landscape. So this idea is not something we are sitting here in 2023 February in Arth festival and suddenly discovered it. It is an integral part of what is there in the Vedic texts. And the very last hymn of the Vedic text makes it absolutely explicitly clear.
Jaggi, and yet, even though Dr. Madhav said that India is the best place for Muslims to live, practice their faith, different sects, in fact, it's the only country where every sect has the freedom to practice their faith. And yet, you, in your book, have raised the concern about demographics. You are asking Hindus to go out and proselytize. You are asking Hinduism to almost imitate Christianity and Islam. So where is this concern coming from? Why is this concern? And why do we need to be afraid of demographics?
Yeah, see, whenever you look at demographics tend to change the ideology of the nation if they grow beyond a point. We know what happened in 1947, right? Demographics decided that this country would be divided into two, right? So when demographics start to move adversely against you, then your ability to preserve your core thought process of allowing diversity and in a certain unity starts changing, because the whole problem comes from the fact that if you don't accept what he mentioned in the last verse of the Rig Veda, that all methods of reaching God or even abandoning God have to be found a place, then you are in a binary situation where somebody has to destroy the other, right? So demography matters for the time being. There are two things here. The reason why Hinduism has always been a missionary religion, but it was not a missionary religion of the type that Christianity and Islam have been. In their missionary purpose is not to discuss great ideas and let people adopt whatever they find useful. Their missionary is to convert you. It's like if a missionary religion is more about politics and power and less about your approach and your relationship with the cosmos, with larger spirituality and other things, then it becomes a different form of missionary thing. If you have read Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there are human beings at the bottom level for whom safety, security, basics are very important. Hinduism has a very high level of thought process, metaphysics, thoughts about it, right? The point is you cannot appeal to everybody only with that. Gandhi himself said, for a poor man, food is God. Swami Vivekananda said the same thing, that there's no point in talking about the high metaphysics of Vedanta as long as you're going to be poor and if people are going to be scrounging around for food, right? So in that sense, we have to address those issues. So when you're talking about people at the bottom of the range in terms of poverty and things, it is the ability to give him some food or a school admission or a health care support that makes a difference. So you need to address that segment of spirituality, which can only be done by a different kind of mission, where you give something simple so that the spiritual needs are met. Like if you say, okay, look, Advaita, then it's not going to work with him. He says, okay, you are this, there is only one reality. It doesn't make sense. My reality is I'm going hungry, right? So you need to have a simpler variety of Hinduism where he stays within it. So that I call is the base camp of Hinduism. Once you cross that base camp, then you can attempt the high peaks of Vedanta. So you need to have a simple form of Hinduism that says that, okay, you do A, B, C. Like in, say, Islam, you say, oh, you do 5 prayers a day and you do Hajj and things like that and you're done. And just believe that there is one God and Muhammad is his last prophet. So the 3-4 points are there, which makes it easy for people to say, okay, that's all I need to do to stay a Muslim, right? Now, in Hinduism, you have no such thing. You have to say, so the people who are at the bottom rung of hierarchy of needs, base level, they need a Hinduism that's very simple, a Hinduism light as I call it, which says that you do the 3-4 things, you can remain a Hindu. And so when you have crossed that level, you are beyond poverty and you have moved to the next level, then you can remain and go and search the high levels of Hinduism. So I think you need to keep a lot of that. And demography is closely connected with that, because if you do not get people, I think the Ghar Wapsi programs and all are meant to deal with at a very basic level. So I think you need to keep the masses at your thought process by giving them simpler ideals to follow while you meet their basic economic needs. So I think
where is the fear coming from? Why do we need more numbers? We are over 800 million people who call themselves Hindu. Where is this fear coming from?
Look, I don't know whether you should call 80% of people as Hindus. First of all, even demographically, that's not true, because a lot of things are not counted. Like if you look at states specifically, say Kerala is only about 55% so. Over the next 2 censuses, you will find that it has fallen below 50. Assam is definitely facing a demographic thing. Kashmir, you know all about it. You know that the valley has practically no Hindu left. And this is going to happen in large chunks of other states, right? Whether it is Bengal, some parts of it, Western Uttar Pradesh, various things are actually moving demographically against you. The issue is, if you do that, sooner or later you will tend to have two-nation theory coming back, whether you like it or not. In parts of the Northeast are already substantially anti-Hindu. You know, if you look at Nagaland or Mizoram, they think of themselves as different from India, right? Now, how do you integrate them? You need to have some way to do that, to integrate them back. So that's my feeling. I am sure there are disagreements among some of the panelists, but we need to look at demography as an important determinant of whether we retain our essential dharmic core or not. And for that, we need to fight at several levels and make sure that we stay on course to defend all our people against bad ideas.
Okay, Sanjeev.
Actually, I agree with Jaggi with the need for having a proselytizing Hinduism, but for a slightly different reason. I think the idea that Hinduism is bringing to the table of creating a operating system in which different kinds of apps can be played is a very powerful idea. It's a good idea, and I think good ideas should be spread, period. I mean, irrespective of implications it may have for India's politics. It's a good idea, and it's a good idea that the rest of the world, very frankly, has use for, given what is happening to many other societies. You see, when you were a monocultural, mono-ethnic societies, they were able to maybe get away with behaving in a particular way because all the other sort of ethnic groups, etc., would eventually be dominated and destroyed into and amalgamated into this cauldron. Even America, ultimately, what was the idea? That everything you had to pour into the cauldron, but you had to lose your identity very quickly and become this one mush called American. So that is no longer a practical world that we live in. Most countries in the world, including lily-white countries or Nordic countries, are now multi-ethnic. They have populations that are not going to give up their identity into the larger identity. It is now possible for them, because of communications with different communities around the world, for them to maintain that identity even if they're a small minority in one place. People travel around, they are in touch with people like themselves, there are people converting back, forth, etc. There are new religions like Wokism that are rising. So in this environment, the solution that the ancient Bharatas found is a solution that may ultimately have to be tried by everybody. So quite apart from any political reasoning that you may have for the Republic of India, I think the Dharmic idea is a good one and should be spread.
Dr. Madhav, would you agree that Hinduism should also imitate Islam and Christianity, and as Sanjeev is actually endorsing the idea of Hindu proselytizing around the world? Second, that don't you see that there is a clash in habits, in the way, for example, Islam practices, Islamic practitioners are? Wouldn't an ordinary Muslim actually say that this dharmic identity is an imposition on his Muslim identity? He has certain tenets which he follows, and he places those tenets above everything else. Don't you see there is a clash? And this might not, this whole movement, whether it's Hindu proselytization or this imposition of dharmic identity on Muslims, don't you think it will create tension and a certain conflict between Hindus and Muslims in India?
Firstly, I don't think when the word proselytization was used by Sanjeev, he meant the proselytization of the way that Christians or others do. I don't think he was saying that. If he's saying that, I obviously disagree. Because the moment you try to make Hinduism also like a Semitic religion, it is the death knell of Hinduism. Hindu is not an organized religion as we understand religions today, whether it is Islam or Christianity. In fact, that has been the conflict right from the beginning. When we first encountered these groups, Muslims some 1500 years ago and Christians a few centuries later, the biggest challenge for Indians was not that a new God has come. New gods always came in this country. But a totally alien thinking has come, which said that I am only right, my path is the only path. Now, that is where proselytism comes. The day Hinduism starts saying that I am the only truth, then it is not Hinduism. So, if we are saying that, of course, that path Hinduism can never take, because, that famous Supreme Court judgment, although I am not a big fan of Supreme Court judgments because they keep changing, but still, that Hinduism is not a religion but a way of life. So Hinduism can be easily understood as a certain value system. You know, there was this discussion about minorities and how that whole feeling of alienation came. Sanjeev was also referring to it. In 1891, the first religious census was conducted by the British, 1891. Those days, Bengal was the largest state in India. When India had 30 crore people, Bengal itself, one state, had about 9 crore people, the largest state. The census reporters of Bengal recorded that it is very difficult to distinguish between Hindus and Muslims here, because the Muslims attend Durga Puja, and they do all these ceremonies. They do Chhat Puja, Muslim women do it. So it is very difficult to differentiate between them, because the cultural practices were integrated. So much so that Savarkar, in his 1857 story, the First War of Independence, he praises 1857 as a glorious example of Hindu-Muslim unity. So there was one kind of a situation which was destroyed essentially by certain Muslim scholars, starting with Syed Ahmad Khan. They tried to create a wedge between Hindus and Muslims, and it went on growing, and final nail was hit at the time of the partition. So coming back to that question, so in that scenario, when lot of suspicion developed between the two communities, Hindus, only definition that we can give is, Jagg's definition, that those who are not Muslims, Christians and Buddhists and all, they are all Hindus. That is 80%, 82%, whatever you are talking about. So there is a suspicion that needs to end, that we have to do. For that, yes, this glorious idea, see, M.C. Chagla, he was our minister in Nehru's government. You read his Roses in December autobiography, in which he states that I am a Muslim by religion, I am an English by education, because I learnt my education was in English, but I am a Hindu by culture. This he writes in his book, autobiography, and he gives this as a panacea. He says, this divide of minority-majority, Hindu-Muslim, is actually the problem in India. Let us declare that all of us are Hindus. This was M.C. Chagla, Muhammad Karim Bhai Chagla. We are all Hindus, period. So, when we say that, it's not through a process. You Ganga Jal chidkoge, Hindu banega. No. The whole belief is, if you are a Hindu, Kanchi Paramacharya, Christians of Kanchi came to him. Changalpattu Christians came to him, asking for reconversion to Hinduism. You know Paramacharya what he said? Be good Christians, you are as good as Hindus. Now, what is a good Christian? That is the big question. Is proselytizing good Christianity? If you think so, no, you are not a good Christian. You are a good Christian as long as you are part of the milieu of this country. And is it possible, that is your earlier question, I tell you, you know how many Muslims are there in America? As many as Indians there. We have 4 million Indians, there are 4 million Muslims in America. There was attack on Twin Towers, but that attack was done by fellows who went from our neighborhood, Pakistan. Maybe some people have helped, but they all follow the American constitution, American rule. There are Muslims in Russia. Will they raise their head? They are quite following the law of the land. There are problems in Europe, because Europe today, as Sanjeev rightly pointed out, is in a great rush for suicide. They are in a homicidal mode, this woke culture. You know, nobody asked, but the Archbishop of Canterbury, who is the head of Anglican Christianity, declared from the pulpit that we will have Shariat in our country. Is Shariat Archbishop's business? You are out for a suicide. There is a problem there. But Muslims have examples of living in peace with ancient traditions. They live in peace with Iranian culture. They don't behave like a 600-year-old Muslims or 1400-year-old Muslims. They follow Iranian cultural practices even to this day. Sanjeev has given an excellent example of Indonesia. Indonesian Muslims, it is a 3-layered Islam. Bottom layer is Hinduism, middle layer is Buddhism, third layer is Islam. They behave differently. In fact, Indonesia's national motto is Bhinnaka Tunggal Ika. That is unity in diversity. That is Hinduism. It is the national motto. It is possible. If they can live like that in Indonesia, if they can live like that in Russia, live like that in America, in Iran, why not in India? But Hindus have to emphasize on that. The effort should be that. one line about demography. Demography is destiny, no doubt. I agree with Jaggi on that. But the demography scenario from 1947 to today has changed. I'm only going by macro figures. There are certain problem pockets that have evolved over 200-300 years. But today, demographic growth rate among Muslims stands at about 2.4. It is called fertility rate, TFR, total fertility rate. A woman, how many children she gives birth to in her lifetime. Among Muslims, it is 2.4. Actually, any country for its stable demography, it requires 2.1. They are at 2.4. They were at 5.4 in 1951. Slowly, gradually, it has come down. So that has to be brought further down. It has to be a national average. But the problem really is with us, with me also, but many others. Hindu population growth today is 1.9. So the real problem is, it's not that others are growing, it's as much a problem that many Hindus do not want to have the second child. One child policy, undeclared. Many, these days, marriages happen very late, sometimes don't happen. So there is a demographic challenge creeping in because of this problem. So probably, I have no right to advocate for more children, but, but I can say that the 2.1 level, Muslims have to be brought down to that level. Then I think this demography as a big crisis can be avoided. Where there is a problem, that is more of a political nature. Since you referred about Northeast, I can tell you about Northeast today. Northeast is no longer that kind of anti-India anymore. A little anti-Hindu because of religious practices. No longer anti-India because there the nationalist ideas have reached. Today, a BJP flag is fluttering on the remote corner of Nagaland. Where there is BJP flag, there will be also national flag. That is the kind of sentiment that travels with it. So that problem is a slightly different political problem, same is Kashmir. But yes, demography needs to be tackled with a lot more rationality and a lot more sensitivity also.
I'm sorry, we don't have enough time actually. There were several questions I wanted to ask you as well as you. But thank you for this enlightening and fascinating conversation. Hope all of you enjoyed. Thank you, Arth.